computer science, mechanical engineering, aerospace engineering, physics. These fields are powered through human minds, and the human minds of women have been proven again and again to be as sharp as the human minds of men. Again and again, despite all the disapproval they have encountered along the way, women have shown the world that they certainly are no less than men in these fields. Women have been scientists, innovators, inventors, and pioneers just as men have. One of the first three modern programmers, Grace Hopper is best known for her trailblazing contributions to the development of computer languages. Known as irreverent, sharp-tongued, and brilliant, she enjoyed long and influential careers in both the US Navy and the private sector. After the bombing of Pearl Harbor and the United States' entry into World War II, Hopper joined the US Naval Reserve in December 1943 and was assigned to the Bureau of Ships Computation Project at Harvard University. One of the first three computer programmers, Hopper was responsible for programming the Mark I, which was one of the earliest electromechanical computers, and punching machine instructions onto tape. She also wrote the 561-page user manual for the Mark I. Hopper also worked on computing rocket trajectories, creating range tables for new anti-aircraft guns, and calibrating minesweepers. Additionally, Hopper and her colleagues ran numbers used in developing the plutonium bomb dropped on Nagasaki. Later, as a research fellow in engineering sciences and applied physics at Harvard, she helped develop the Mark II and Mark III computers. As head programmer for Remington Rand, she worked on the UNIVAC I, or the Universal Automatic Computer. In 1952, her programming team developed the first computer language compiler called A0. Compilers were the middle ground between mathematical code and the machine itself. Next, her team developed Flowmatic, which was the first programming language to use English-like commands, unlike other computer languages such as Fortran, which use mathematical symbols. Hopper received more than 40 honorary degrees, and many scholarships, professorships, awards, and conferences are named in her honor. For example, in 1972, she received Yale's Wilbur Lucius Cross Medal, and in 1991, President George Bush awarded Hopper the National Medal of Technology, the nation's highest technology award. She was the first woman to be honored as an individual. On July 20th, 1969, as the lunar module Eagle was approaching the moon's surface, its computers began flashing warning messages. For a moment, Mission Control faced a go, no-go decision, but with high confidence in Margaret Hamilton's software, they told the astronauts to proceed. The software, which allowed the computer to recognize error messages and ignore low-priority tasks, continued to guide astronauts Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin over the moon to their landing. Hamilton later said, "It quickly became clear that the software was not only informing everyone that there was a hardware-related problem, but that the software was compensating for it." Later, the engineers learned that the astronauts' checklist was at fault, telling them to set a radar hardware switch incorrectly. "Fortunately, the people at Mission Controls trusted our software," Hamilton added, and Neil Armstrong reported, "With only enough fuel for 30 more seconds of flight, the Eagle has landed." Hamilton designed Apollo software to deal with unknown problems and be flexible enough to interrupt one task to take on a higher priority one. In 2003, NASA honored Hamilton with the NASA Exceptional Space Act Award, acknowledging her contributions to software development and granting her the biggest financial prize that the agency had ever awarded to one person until that time, $37,200. Additionally, President Barack Obama in 2016 awarded her the Medal of Freedom, noting that her example speaks of the American spirit of discovery that exists in every little girl and little boy who know that somehow to look beyond the heavens is to look deep within ourselves. In 1977, NASA began a search for young scientists to serve as mission specialists. Sally Ride was one of only 5 women out of the 35 total selected for NASA's class of '78. Ride was one of the 5 crew members aboard the Space Shuttle Challenger STS-7. On June 18, 1983, she became the first American woman in space and the youngest American in space at that time. She took upon the role of the flight engineer, launched 2 communications satellites, operated the shuttle's mechanical arm, and finally conducted various experiments. On October 5, 1984, Ride went on the STS-41G, where she spent 8 days conducting observations and measurements of the Earth. She also worked on refueling techniques for shuttles. After her second mission, Ride helped in the investigation of the 1986 Challenger accident. After the investigation, she took on the role of Special Assistant to the NASA Administrator for Long-Range and Strategic Planning. Later, Ride served as the director of the California Space Science Institute. She also worked as a physicist and a physics professor at the University of California, San Diego. Katie Booman led the research team that was working on developing the algorithm which allowed them to deconvolute images created in radio astronomy and render the first image of a black hole. It involved an international team of over 200 scientists and a network of 8 radio observatories with bases on 6 mountains across 4 continents called the Event Horizon Telescope. Today, Booman is an assistant professor in the Computing and Mathematical Sciences, Electrical Engineering, and Astronomy departments at the California Institute of Technology. Before joining Caltech, she was a postdoctoral fellow in the Harvard-Smithsonian Center for Astrophysics. Although such women were able to find great success and honor in their work, it certainly was no easy path. Sexism has been rampant in these fields for decades upon decades. Yet, women found obstacles in their paths towards innovation for the better of humanity every step of the way. Among questions about Sally Ride's training, questions about how space was going to affect her ability to reproduce and what kind of makeup she was going to take on the mission were quite prominent. She handled the questions with grace and later said, "It's too bad this is such a big deal. It's too bad our society isn't further along." After the black hole picture was released to the public, Katie Booman remarked, "At first, I didn't want to be seen as a woman in science. I just wanted to be recognized as a scientist. But then I saw how impactful it was for girls and women to have that representation. Highlighting women in science can give people the confidence to push on and improve it for the future, so I'm happy to be part of that." A push for the equality and acceptance of women in these fields is highly necessary. Before the mass use of mechanical computers, the term computers was reserved for humans and most often women, who filled in the role of computers by manually solving extremely complex equations rather than for the physical machines that aided in these tasks. Many of these computers are finally getting their due, but conspicuously missing from this story of female achievement are the efforts contributed by courageous African American women. Called the West Computers after the area to which they were relegated, they helped blaze a trail for mathematicians and engineers of all races and genders to follow. Margot Lee Shetterly's book, which in 2016 was converted to a movie format, details the work and accomplishments of 3 of these forgotten African American women: Katherine Johnson, Dorothy Vaughan, and Mary Jackson. For Alan Shepard's May 1961 mission, Freedom 7, Katherine Johnson steered the computation for America's first human spaceflight's trajectory analysis. Later in 1962, as NASA prepared for the orbital mission of John Glenn, Johnson was called upon to do the work that she would become most known for. As a part of the pre-flight checklist, Glenn asked engineers to get the girl, Johnson, to run the same numbers through the same equations that had been programmed into the computer, but by hand on her desktop mechanical calculating machine. If she says they're good, Katherine Johnson remembers the astronaut saying, "Then I'm ready to go." Glenn's flight was a success and marked a turning point in the competition between the United States and the Soviet Union in space. Dorothy Vaughan helmed the West Computing Department for nearly a decade. In 1958, when the NACA made the transition to NASA, segregated facilities, including the West Computing Office, were abolished. Dorothy Vaughan and many of the former West computers joined the new Analysis and Computation Division, ACD, a racially and gender-integrated group on the frontier of electronic computing. Dorothy Vaughan became an expert Fortran programmer and also contributed to the Scout launch vehicle program. Initially a mathematician, Mary Jackson entered a training program that would allow her to earn a promotion to engineer. Trainees had to take graduate-level math and physics under the University of Virginia. However, classes were held at the then segregated Hampton High School, and Jackson needed special permission from the city of Hampton to join her white peers in the classroom, and in a local court hearing, obtained it. Never one to flinch in the face of a challenge, Mary completed the courses, earned the promotion, and in 1958 became NASA's first black female engineer. That same year, she co-authored her first report, Effects of Nose Angle and Mach Number on Transition on Cones at Supersonic Speeds. For nearly 2 decades, she enjoyed a productive engineering career, authoring or co-authoring a dozen or so research reports. But as the years progressed, the promotion slowed, and she became frustrated at her inability to break into management-level grades. In 1979, seeing that the glass ceiling was the rule rather than the exception for the center's female professionals, she made a final, dramatic career change, leaving engineering and taking a demotion to fill the open position of Langley's Federal Women's Program Manager. Exactly how many women computers worked at NACA and later NASA over the years is still unknown. One 1992 study estimated the total topped several hundred, but other estimates, including Shetterly's own intuition, says that number is in thousands. Unfortunately, that means that thousands of women never received the credit they deserve. Oftentimes, this credit would be taken by male supervisors who would then enjoy the fruits of these computers' labors. And even in recent times, there still exist obstacles to the participation of women in the innovation of these fields. In March 2019, astronauts Anne McClain and Christina Koch were scheduled to conduct the first ever all-female spacewalk when they stepped outside the International Space Station to install new batteries on the craft's solar arrays. But McClain never made it outside the ISS for her landmark spacewalk, and her spot was taken by a fellow male astronaut after it became apparent that there wasn't a spacesuit in her size that could be made ready in time. The suits were built in 1978, a time when most astronauts were men, and have not been updated since. The smallest sizes were discontinued in the 1990s, and medium is now the smallest option, of which there is only one suit flight ready on the space station.
As time goes on, women have started to become more and more accepted into STEM fields, and women are finally being given opportunities that they never would have gotten 50 years ago. Dr. Jennifer Ross Nazal, a historian for NASA's Johnson Space Center, stated in an interview last year that things have definitely started to change at the center. You do see more women, and women aren't necessarily just in administrative and secretarial positions. Women are in a much wider role, and if you look across the organizational chart, you see a lot more female faces than you definitely did in the past. Ross Nazal also mentioned how NASA is currently working on many development projects, more than it has in years. And because of this, women are being given more opportunities to work on these projects or in the agencies involved with the projects. One of these projects is Artemis 3. As the name suggests, Artemis is the female counterpart to the original Apollo missions from the 60s and 70s. The plan is for NASA to put a woman on the moon by the year 2025. Artemis 1, the unmanned, or rather unwomaned, test run has already launched into space, showing that NASA is determined in making progress towards a more female-inclusive field.
Whenever the School of Engineering had events, you could tell bioengineering, 50-50 men, women, maybe even 60% women, 40% men. All of the other departments, 100% male. So if I was in one of the generic engineering 101 kind of classes, it was very male heavy. Dr. Rubin was fantastic, but we had to meet with him to show him what we had before the presentation because he wanted to make sure we were all ready. During this meeting, he kept asking me questions, and it was pretty normal, but I have or at least did then, I don't as much now. If I get frustrated, I start to cry. Still true, but I don't get frustrated as much anymore. He kept asking me questions. I did not understand his question, and I started to cry. And it's a strange thing because it's not like blah or bawling tears, but like tears will run down my face while I'm talking to you. It's a little unnerving, kind of creepy. He stopped dead. He had no idea what to do. Another event in which I realized I was female. I had Russell during grad school. I got pregnant. This was the first time the department had ever dealt with a maternity leave for their department. He had no idea what to do with me. Thankfully, the school knew what to do with me because grad students often need maternity leave, just not in that department. And so there was a lot of, I don't know how to handle this. How do we help you? What do we do now? And my advisor had to step in and go, look, she's pregnant, not broken. Here's what we're gonna do here, and help them through, because she had seen female students in other departments go through it. But it wasn't as much being pushed away as not knowing, quote unquote, what to do with me. Like I was some strange anomaly. There was another graduate student in my lab who was working under the same PI. We were working on different research projects, but they were related. And he kept telling me I wasn't suited for this, and maybe I should consider another job. And I kept telling him to go to hell. I was always aware that I stood out somehow. When I was in classes with those kids, I was the only one, sideways glances, nobody wants to work with her, she's, a chick. Others were overlooking these phenomenal people who were gonna do amazing work, but they were female, so they didn't even get an interview. I have often asked myself that, sitting in a room full of bioengineers where there's more women in here than there is in the next 6 rooms down in the engineering school, right? You wonder why that is. Math is what pushes the females away. And I don't think it's that girls don't think they can do math. I think girls are told they can't do math. For some reason, boys are better at math. I don't believe that for a minute, but that's the thing, right? Why are boys better? Why would boys be better at math? Why does a chromosome matter? It doesn't. The older members of the department were all males, and the newer, younger members of the department were females. And I think that's because females were just starting to really get into it.
It was literally me and one other girl in the classes, and then it was all dudes. And we made friends with some of the graduate students, and there was one other graduate student who was a girl, and then it was all dudes. I would have issues like, my son would be sick, or, I couldn't get a babysitter, or, just things would happen, and I wouldn't get, and, I'd kind of get like a, maybe this isn't for you type thing from them, if you can't do this, then maybe you should not major in physics type of thing. Traditionally, men, are kind of like, the woman's place. If you are a mom, you need to be there for your kids. You need to spend time with your kids. You need to, be in charge of cooking and cleaning and housework and all of this stuff. And there's no way that you could major in physics and do all of this and have this lifestyle and do this at the same time. My professor that I had at JJC, so in fact, he even admitted to me that when I first met him, and that I was talking to him and I told him I had a kid and everything like that. And he admitted that he didn't think that I should be majoring in physics, and he thought that he should try to convince me to go into education instead. They didn't think that women should be there, but I was. And I was good at it too. I was really good at it. The vast majority of the people who major in engineering or physics are men, at least back in that time too, So it has been 20 some years since I started college. So I feel that things have changed a lot since then. But for the most part, yeah, because no one takes it unless you have to. And the people who have to are typically not women. I had to win them over. They didn't want to give me, big projects at first, and they didn't want to trust me. They're like, oh, well, here, you can make this spreadsheet and find the standard deviation. And then eventually by my second year, they had me designing the website for NICAD and stuff like that. So, maybe it was because too, they didn't know what I was capable of, but I did feel like I caught some shade from them at times.
When I started, there were, I believe it was like 10% female. There weren't very many females, and back then, I know that nowadays co-ed dorms are normal, but back then, like, we had to have co-ed dorms because there weren't enough females to accommodate, a whole dorm or even a whole section. There was only one room. There were 6 of us in my dorm. There were 2 adjoining rooms, and everyone else in that entire section of the building, they were male. We didn't really have a female person in charge that we could really talk to. So, we just had to figure it out among ourselves, and we supported each other. But now looking back, like, I would be horrified at that situation if like my daughter was in that situation. It was really not the best. But yeah, there were 2 other girls out of the 6 who were aerospace engineering, and then one of them dropped out. So yeah, it was pretty small, pretty few women in the major. They had, shop and other things like that, technical kind of classes where the people, like, they took apart cars and did amazing things with them. But there were no girls in there. There were no girls taking those classes. So yeah, I can imagine, like, I don't know, just normal female issues that come up, and not being able to say to the professor because it's really awkward, and I don't know, you just pretend to be like just a robot. When I was at Boeing, there was this guy, I don't remember what his name was, but he was always talking down to me, and it just kept on and on and on. And finally, I'm not the type of person to tell somebody off. Like, that's just not what I do. But I did, because I got so mad. And he left me alone from that point on. All of my classes are about 30% female, and this is engineering. So it's a huge change. It's not 50%, but it's 30%, and that's fantastic. It's crazy, to go from 5 to 30%. Females in my classes, they just randomly come up to me and they're like, "I'm so glad you're here. Like, you're the only female professor I've had," and they just, I don't know, they feel comfortable with that, and I think it's a different style.